Hey everyone, this is Tom. This week's character is Terril Felskar, the young human male fighter. This is for Taylor. I want to make a public apology. When I first announced the original video being uploaded, I had the video titled wrongly. I said it was for Tyler. I'm sorry for getting that mixed up. All these T names throwing me off. But it is for Taylor, so Terril for Taylor. Starting off the video, just writing down notes. It's really nice to just go through the many pages, sometimes many pages that I get from the winners of the character art lottery. I always ask for as much information as they can possibly tell me about their character as possible. And I get a really good amount. So far I've gotten a really good amount of information. These people really love their characters, which is the point of all this. Anyway, so I always go through the notes. I try to consolidate them so that if I ever have to reread them, I don't have to read through a whole paragraph or two. I can just sort of sum it up in a sentence or a couple words. And I try to always hang my hat on what I see as being most primary, or things that I know just need to be there, stuff that really expresses that character. And I find that it really helps to just lay it out after I've done all that to narrow it down even more point form on the sheet of paper, so I always have something just right there to click. I don't have to worry about my web browser closing and losing the Google Doc or anything. It's just all right there, and it's really quick reference. So here I am starting off with the poses. The first one with the hand on the hip, far too bland and simple. The second one, I was thinking, since he is high strength, high constitution, but he's charismatic and not super bright. I was just like, this guy's a jock. This guy's like football player type. He's strong. He's likable, but not an evil jock, not a bully jock, but just like a regular small town guy. He is from a small town. Just honest, hardworking, friendly guy. So the second pose was thinking more like champion football player, like hero celebratory phase, and I thought that's not only is it maybe a bit too flamboyant. But a pose like that I could see that something like that coming in handy for somebody else's character further down the line. So having those big, wide open arms is a bit too specific, and not specific enough, or not specific in the right way for this guy. So just starting off with the pose as always. I'm just trying to get the main sort of figure and flow and balance as good as I can sort of get it. I find that a lot of the times if I start explicitly with the bones from scratch, sometimes it works out, but a lot of the time starting that way, the end figure can be quite stiff, and I find that if I start with a more gestural, general sort of pose, capturing some sort of posture or body language, it'll usually end up being a much better rebuild if I go back in with the bones and start building up from there. Sometimes when I do the skeletal stuff, it can end up being just too stiff and clinical, and you lose a lot of the life, especially when it comes to things like fat under the skin and the way that things are wrinkling and folding. They can really sell a lot on a character. Like I said in the Kirdan video, normally I in the past I've done mostly all this anatomical build-up stuff just for creatures, trying to find out ways to ground them and make them a bit more realistic. It's just a good habit to help keep myself fresh and to drive me to study anatomy even more and more and more, and learn more and more and more as much as I can, because you can push stuff out of your brain. You can it's really easy to forget the shape of the pelvis, or to get a little bit too comfortable with the curve of the femur, and then you start getting obsessed with your own, or influenced by your own shorthand too much. So it's good to do as much studies as you can constantly, especially with the muscular system. Every time I go back and try to nail down how the muscles where the thigh connects to the pelvis goes, it pushes out how to get all those weird overlapping muscles on the shoulder blade working. So most of my sketches are just anatomical studies. and just creatures and characters and stuff like this. But it's always good to stay sharp. Something in the character description that I got was Terril he's a good guy. He's helpful. He's loyal. He'll stick his neck out even for a stranger, even at the risk of his own life. He's just an all around sort of good guy. And so with that in mind, he is 20. He's a little bit probably pretty brash. I mean, he is really strong. If you were like a big buff 20-year-old fighter, you'd probably it'd probably be pretty easy to fall into some arrogance. So I did kind of want to have the pose have some kind of swagger, like sort of like a head thrown back kind of guffaw, sort of like confident sort of pose. Good spirited though. Yeah, just muscular body, sort of physical build. I've known, like growing up, I was friends with a lot of football players in high school, and even like the really tough ones, like the guys who like everybody was impressed with how much they could bench. There's only one of them that was like really muscular, and he was kind of shorter. But everybody else sort of had a much more just sort of average human physique. Not too muscular, not like bodybuilders. And I just kind of wanted to try that out with Terril, make him not like an intimidating ruffian sort. Plus, I also think that like there's especially in fantasy art, and there's nothing wrong with it. It serves its place well where it's used. Like there's great ways to use it, but people often dive right into like highly developed like bodybuilder physiques on characters in fantasy as a way to make them look strong and imposing and everything. But that kind of body is extremely specific. A bodybuilder spends hours a day and eats very specific things in specific orders and has a very regimented life that ends up with the result ending up being that like massive ripped bodybuilder Boris Vallejo kind of body. And I think that including that stuff outside of the appropriate time and place can sort of contradict the character that you're trying to develop. It's just a pet peeve of mine. Like if I ever got hired to do something for like Warhammer or something like that, I would of course embellish the muscular system and give them what they needed. But as far as my work, I like to try to depict things quite a lot more naturalistically. And you really don't need to be a huge beefcake to be really strong. Like I've known it's like I said, those football guys, like they were super tough, super strong, super capable, super physical, but they looked pretty normal in a t-shirt. I think it's easy to forget how strong muscle is, and so people tend to overdo it. And there's always, of course, there's the right time to do it, to imply things, to show off stuff, visual storytelling, all that sort of stuff. But it can be that muscular stuff. It can be an exclamation mark where you should have used a comma. With the hair, I just sort of gave him, for now anyway, it's just sort of like default, just boy hair, just like not cut very often, not really kept or styled. I've got sort of like a pet peeve when it comes to hair in fantasy, where if it looks like it's shampooed, you're kind of doing something wrong. Especially when it comes to haircuts, I really don't. I'm always trying to avoid the Robin Hood Prince of Thieves syndrome, where you have people in a medieval setting with early 90s hairdos. Especially, like, it's hair is such an easy way to give away when something was made. It really dates your artwork, and it can be good, it can be bad. I usually go on the end of bad, just because I like it when things have like a timeless quality. And whenever I try to do hair for a fantasy character, it's always done in the same way that I try to design everything for them, it's why do they cut their hair? Who does it? Is it them with a knife? Are they rich enough to pay somebody? Are they rich enough to pay somebody who cuts hair for a living? Like, can you imagine in a place with castles and dung everywhere that they're like, whoever would be paid enough to cut hair to make a living in that world, like, they'd be pretty impressive. So yeah, just humble, mundane haircuts and hair that doesn't look like they used conditioner that morning. I'm a fan of that sort of stuff. So as far as the armor goes, Terril's described as having the armor of green dragon scale mail, and with his pants, which are now being covered, and his boots, and especially his chest piece and shoulder pads, I based them all off of old timey, like 20th century football gear, with like the leather, back when they had like leather helmets, and leather shoes and leather pads, and just I kind of latched onto that jock look, and I'm just trying to find subtle ways to reinforce that and base it on it. Same with like the headband. As I've gone, the spirit of Terril and the way that he looks it sort of reminded me of like a scrappy 80s hero, almost like somebody from like is it Red Dawn, the movie with the Wolverines, where Russia invades the small town in the States? Kind of like one of those characters. He is from a small town, small mining community, blue collar, and that's sort of where I sort of base that on, just down to earth, practical, not cool. I think I'm actually quite kind of happy with it. One of the things that I think stands out most about Terril, at least to me, is his feet. His shoes are sort of weird. Terril learned a lot about the outside world from traveling dwarves who would come into the mining town and trade. I'd imagine that, dwarves would have a pretty good stake in a mining town. They'd be passing through all the time. There'd be a market for using dwarven equipment and materials, which I'd imagine would be probably the best made for mining, given dwarven stereotypes. And being somebody starting from a mining town, admiring dwarvish things, wanting to be as prepared as he can, I'd imagine that the best footwear that you could possibly buy for that, from that context, would be dwarven steel toe boots. And they're a visual pun. They're literally steel toes that go over the toe of your boot to work like contemporary real-life steel toes. They're just lashed on with some kind of fibrous material, maybe even made out of dwarf hair itself. But yeah, so he's got steel toe boots. They're just really practical, keeps his toes safe. Good stuff over his football shoes. So like I mentioned in the video for Terril as well, and I'll probably mention it in just about every video I do, is that, at least for now, is that I don't really have a set procedure. This time I'm trying out something that I sort of learned by mistake from the Kierdan video, is when I did the anatomy, I did this white frame around the anatomy, and then I had to redo another frame around the costume after I figured out the costume. And so this time I figured, why not just wait till I do the costume before I do the frame and save some time, because this is definitely the most boring part of the job. Again, I just do this frame just so that I don't need to worry about cleaning up the border as I work. I can just paint willy-nilly underneath the border, or underneath this frame, the frame being the second highest layer. This way I don't have to keep refining edges or anything. There's going to be enough of that going on within the silhouette, and I really just don't need to spend any more time on that. I want to focus on the characters, and that's just a good way to keep everything neat and tidy without putting in extra effort. So he's got a magic great axe on his back. He's got a high-end dwarven long sword on his hip that was gifted to him. He's got metal shin guards, steel-toe boots. He has a bronze shield with an apple tree device emblazoned on the front. And green scale mail armor. He's got few scars, and that's pretty much all the information I was given for him as far as physical description goes. Now, Terril, this drawing was by far, so far, been the longest one of these that I've done. It was a little bit over 9 hours, when the other ones usually end up being around like 5.5 to 6.5. I think I've finally, after musing over it for a while, I think I've figured out exactly why that is, and it's because he's a very down-to-earth naturalistic character. He's a human. He's a 20-year-old male. He's strong, he's likable, he's got brown hair, brown eyes. He's very, he's a good character, but he's very generic. He's got a lot of potential for interesting stuff. This isn't a knock on Taylor. I mean, this is fine character. Every character's fine. There's always a way to do it. But when you're starting off with somebody who's just so normal, it's really hard to find those distinct aspects and markers to hang your hat on and like to start getting to work into. And there's a lot of stuff with Terril that involved me just putting a lot of time into something, not feeling good about it, coming back, redoing it, putting a lot of time into it, not liking it, coming back, redoing it, and finally getting some more and more ideas as I went. The more I thought about the character, the more ideas I got, and the more ideas you get, and like the more you know this character, the more confident you feel with your ideas, the more you know them, and the more you know about the world and everything. Not saying I know a lot about the world, but I do know a few things to get me through. But anyway, basically the more you know about this character and things and how to relate to them, it's easier to get ideas, and you also feel more confident in your ideas. And the more confident you feel in your ideas, the quicker you can depict them, and the sooner you are to just let them be done and to move on and get things done quickly. He's got stitched leather knee pads just sewn into his pants. I always try to avoid metal armor and plate mail as often as I can outside of like battle scenes. Plate mail is such a hassle. It's so loud. It's so hard to get into. So hard to get out of. It's so hot. It's so uncomfortable compared to fabric and clothes and chainmail. That like really, if we're going to be honest with these characters, they're not going to be just going around with this unless it's on a very short, specific mission. So things like big greaves on the shins and metal knee pads, it's really rare that they're the right thing to do. Even if you look at like modern military, like the most action-ready, active people on the planet, essentially, like you look at pictures of military guys, you might see a knee pad on every like 10% of them, maybe. Like knee pads are just so uncommon in like in an action-based scenario. Yeah, like it's always a nice go-to to just like put on some knee pads because he's an adventurer and he's got to be armored a bit. But it's a lot more fun to try to come up with a different way to make the knee interesting. I mean, it's really, really difficult to just leave pants be pants, especially in fantasy. It just looks super wrong if you just have somebody wearing khakis or jeans or what just looks like tights. It just sort of betrays the fantasy look. It looks so contemporary and just normal that you got to do something, but you can't just put a knee pad on everybody. At least not like, a big bulky metal thing with belts and something that he's got to put on every morning when they wake up, and it's just a big hassle. And he's going to be walking around, going on adventures, climbing up cliffs. Everybody's got to be a bit more versatile than they're often depicted. The patches are there. This sort of comes in. I find a better way to depict this facet of his character. later on when I redo his shirt. But the patches and that stuff is there because he's described as being the youngest son of a tavern-owning family in a small mining town. So he's the youngest son. He's not going to be getting any inheritance, but the number one thing that gave me was hand-me-downs. I have an older brother. I'm not the youngest child, but having an older brother, I know what it's like to be given shirts that don't fit, shirts that have holes or patches, pants that have seen better days, or faded light blue jeans and all that stuff. And I thought it would be good to give Terril stuff that looked like clothing that looked like hand-me-downs. So for now, I've just gave him patches on his clothing, like they've been old, they've been worn out, they've been well loved, they've been treated and mended so that they could be passed down. And so there's a bunch of patches. Later on, I give him just a big, like working class shirt. I know he's 20 and he's massive and strong and stuff, but I thought having the big baggy shirt on top of that, indicating like even bigger brothers, like he's the youngest, but he might be the runt, and so he's still got the hand-me-down shirt, and it's just designed on a just like typical like Dickies working class sort of denim shirt, working class like mining town blue collar stuff. Also, hence the blue. He's literally blue collar. But that shirt comes in later. At this point, I'm still trying to think of the shirt as being more like a semi-padded gambeson Under Armour sort of thing, just to help make him fill out a little bit, so he's not too thin. Even though I went on that big rant about big muscles and stuff, I still gotta have some mass and weight to a character. So here's attempt number 1 of probably 3 attempts at the scale mail, based mostly on like alligator belly, that kind of arrangement of scales. Not really happy with it until the end. There's a lot of ways to do scales. I really like crocodilian scales for like dragon stuff, but there's lots of ways to do it. When it comes to creatures with scales, people are often far too comfortable with just coming up with a pattern and just repeating that pattern willy-nilly over the face. I've been seeing less and less of it as the years go by, like art from like the 60s and 70s and 80s and even into the 90s, and even today, you'll see like a reptilian character and they just have like basically a chain link fence pattern over their face, and that's really not only is it not natural or realistic, it's also not interesting. Like when the real world is doing a better job at making creatures than you designing creatures for a fantasy world, you should probably start taking notes. And so like paying special attention to how like larger scales fit on different surfaces than smaller scales, and what they all mean and what they all do, how they fold, what they allow for. Scales they come up a lot in fantasy, and it's really worth paying attention to them. And especially it's a lesson that I've got to learn probably for the rest of my life over and over and over again, is that it's always worth putting in that extra time to like lay stuff out, like stuff like scales, than to just quickly try to fudge it. It's really worthwhile to just go it in, because you only got to draw it once. It's only at most going to be like 20 minutes, half an hour. It's a long time when you're doing it, but when it's all done, you've got something that you're a lot more satisfied with, and that you don't have to be horribly, horribly ashamed of for the rest of your life, because you only got to draw it once, but it's around forever. And things like scales are like pretty perfect candidate for that kind of stuff. I think I named from a sort of a bigger family and leaving home in a small little town. That's why he's got a scarf, something from his mom. Just something to keep him warm. But also it's something to sort of draw attention towards his face a bit. Later on it becomes orange, and it just helps weight things up there. It's also, the orange is, it's pretty weird contrast with the green armor, but I think that helps in this case. I mean, that's another thing with fantasy characters is that they're certainly never trying to dress cool. They don't know what we think is cool. They don't know what people from the 80s think is cool. They don't know what anything from the real world thinks is cool. They have no care. Even if they did know what we thought was cool, they wouldn't care. They wouldn't dress that way. As much as you can base your decisions on what somebody's wearing for what they are and where they're from and what they're doing, you're gonna get a much more interesting, much more original character just without even trying too hard. I mean, you got to think a lot about it as you go, but just trying to make you're never trying to make decisions for the character. You try to, like, it sounds kind of cheesy, but you're trying to express them for them. You're kind of sort of trying to like help them. It's almost like they're coming to you and saying like, I need one of these. I gotta have one of this if I'm gonna live this life. And you're like, oh, okay, let me draw that for you. You never hear those voices, but that's sort of what you're doing. You know, a huge part of what makes a character likable and relatable is them seeming like a real person with personalities, with desires, somebody who is like us. And if your outfit just completely, just totally erodes that and grinds them down, and you just fit them into another trope-ridden cliche pile, it doesn't matter how detailed or fancy or ornate somebody's armor is, there's still nothing new. If it's just a matter of putting in random swirls and skulls and gold inlays, it's just, you gotta let that character be them. It's like I'll say a lot in these videos is every character is created by a different person, and just by the nature of that person, that individual, that creative person making a character and then explaining them in particular words to a particular person who's then taking their ideas and putting them into a visual form, there's like a whole big chain of distinct means of bringing stuff up, or like creating a character. Anytime any character is made, even though they're similar, they are different. There will be different ways to depict this person no matter what. So you never have to worry about originality or making sure like this shoulder pad is shaped like no other shoulder pad I've ever seen before. That's not what makes a character original. The character already is original. You just have to show someone who that character is, and if you can do that, then your job's done for you. Here's another attempt at the armor, painting over all the scales, trying out a belly section, which I get rid of later because it looks dumb. Big part of the concept art process is making things that are dumb and then replacing them with things that you think are less dumb. Something I'm wondering if I'll get better at in the future as I go is staying focused on certain things for longer. I know of artists that would say, like, if they were doing this, they would do the armor, but they would, like, finish the armor. They would just be only working on the armor for a few hours, and then once they've got the armor done, they would then move on to the shirt, and then once that's done, they would do the pants, and then once that's done, they would do the feet, and then once that's done, they do the axe. I shoot around kind of higgly-piggly if I notice something that catches my eye or that I need to work on, I'll usually try to just dive in and take care of it, or at least edit it enough in the direction that I know I'm going to take it so that I'll notice it again in the future, because I'm really paranoid about forgetting stuff. I've got a pretty bad short-term memory, so I always just want to try to deal with stuff before I forget it. So that's kind of why I jump around quite a bit. Especially another benefit to it, though, that kind of helped me as like an accidental bonus from it is for the longest time, until I was probably about like 26 or 27 or so, I just couldn't do like the digital painterly style stuff. I was always just doing line art that was colored, like a coloring book or like a comic book. Wait, how does that? What was I talking about? The painterly stuff. Oh yeah, yeah. Because like I would start off painting a face, say, and I'd have like the undertone, and then I'd start blobbing in the main general shapes of darker tones, like the eye socket area and under the chin and nose, and then I couldn't see. I didn't have a good mental image of the finished product in my head, and so I would start to panic, and I would like I'd want to just make sure that the eye socket shape was perfect, or at least good enough, and then I'd go in and make sure I'd blob in an eye, but then I'd say, no, it needs to be tweaked a little bit, and I'd go in, and I'd end up just having like a really rendered eye on a blobby face, and then whenever I went to go try and add something, because I didn't build it all up together, I'd put like the nose in, and it just wouldn't sit right. I couldn't tie it back in, and then if I started working to tie it back in, that would involve massive repaints on the eye and then back on the nose, and it was just super discouraging, and I sort of avoided it for a long time. The only thing that finally broke me out of it, I think, and like now that I do the more painterly stuff, is just doing concept art, just being forced to paint things, get them done quickly, and I was forced to think more about what I was painting and what material I was depicting rather than how to paint it, if that makes sense. Because before I was like, then you do this step, then I should take this color and put it here and then make it look better, and then I should order these strokes in this way, and I was getting way too technical and formal. But once I was just like, well, this metal needs a shine here, and I'll put some lighter stuff here and some reflection over there, some cast light here. Once I just broke it down and thought about it as just putting little bits of color where they should go so that a thing looks like a stuff, and I got my head out of it and thought about it that way, or stopped thinking about it for that matter, then it started working out a bit better. I've still got a long way to go, but it is fun. I prefer working in a painterly approach. But painterly approach, for those who don't know, I mean just like, it's not really line art that's colored, it's daubs of color, things separated by value and hue rather than a hard edge line, like a painting. Yeah, lots of repaints. Yeah, lots of little details. An important thing to keep in mind when doing fantasy stuff is always using any opportunity to make something look like it's been fabricated. An example I always use is whenever you have like the edge of a piece of fabric, like say like the bottom of a tunic hanging down, if you just leave it, like this is just a weird thing, but if you just sort of leave it flat, like just think like a sheet of fabric with it just ends, it's got to look, but if you put like either like a trim or like type of stitch of the fabric, or something like that, and just make this sort of do some edge work on that piece of fabric. It just makes it look so much more fantasy, so much more authentic. Just a piece that ends in just plain fabric with nothing on it. It's completely realistic. Like, it's super, like, obviously how a lot of stuff was and is and fine, but in a fantasy setting, it can make things look just a little bit too contemporary and sort of out of place. Any chance you can have stuff that includes like the seam or the stitch or buffing or like the marks of where like a ball peen hammer has formed metal, all that stuff is really important to include when drawing this sort of stuff. It needs to look like somebody made it, and made it in the right way. Made it like, if you're going to be doing a lot of like suits of armor or wrought iron stuff, you should watch like videos of blacksmiths working and see how the process actually goes. It'll inform the way that you paint it or draw it quite a bit. It's also just really fascinating too. It's just good entertainment. I always recommend looking up like blacksmithing competitions on YouTube. There's some pretty impressive feats that they do in those things. So here I am adding in that massive shirt that I was talking about earlier. So it's sort of filling in that medieval look in the way that like a tunic would or a tabard, but it's got that blue collar industrial town kind of cut to it, and stitch work and pocket style that sort of are based on like a blue denim shirt. I'm not picturing this shirt actually being denim, probably something more like a thin, like a worn out flannel perhaps, but still just blue. And it just sort of registers with our brains as maybe something a bit more industrial. At least that's what I'm hoping for. Just wearing it open. It's just like, it's more like a jacket to him, even though it was given to him as a shirt. It's got that long sleeve held up with the same bit of twine that he's using. Has the steel-toed boots attached. Yeah, for the way that these buttonholes look, and like that extra fabric around the edge, that was just based on the shirt that I was wearing at the time. Just look down, got some reference. Another thing that brought a lot of challenge to this character was just how piecemeal his kit was. I mean, most of it's dwarven, but I mean, you got green dragon scale armor, you've got a magical great axe, you've got a fancy dwarven longsword, you've got a big brass shield, and like, for the most part, I mean, it is dwarven stuff, but he's going around, and this goes for like a lot of D&D characters, like they're going on adventures, they're going different places, they're gathering just whatever is the most useful. I mean, you talk to people that were playing like Diablo 2, and they've got, it doesn't matter to them what the armor looks like, it just matters what the stats are. It's just, if the stats are better, you use it. And so usually when designing a character, you want to have it look like the whole suit of armor was made by one guy in one place in one town at one time. Just something that looks like homogenous, meant to go together. It's not tacky or garish. But I think if you were really around a bunch of fantasy characters, they would look like, I don't even know what they look like. They would look like they'd just be a mess. They would have like clashing colors, clashing materials, clashing styles, clashing functions. Everything would just be super clashy because, I mean, whatever gets the job done. I mean, the natural inclination and the desire is to make something that looks cool, make something that looks like it all works together. But playing up that that clash is also a part of the character. I mean, this guy, he's an adventurer, he's excited about his life, and he's just a practical, down-to-earth guy. He's got this sweet stuff. Some of it was gifted to him, some of it was loot, some of it was from, like, one of his shields was found in a swamp. I mean, he doesn't care how he looks. I mean, he's just a practical guy. So letting that sort of stuff come in really can go along with him. He's not flashy. He doesn't care how he looks. He's just, I mean, I'm sure he would like to be handsome, but he doesn't care how he's dressed. He's just out there having good adventures. A lot of the time, though, you can design a character where they do have armor from and equipment from different places and eras and cultures and stuff, but depending on how like austere or serious or like intimidating or particular this character's personality needs to be, you can sort of fudge stuff to look a little bit similar. Usually making everything dark, or if there's a highlight color, it can be red, but it's used in different ways, different kinds of reds. There are ways to homogenize. Like there's millions of ways like that you could homogenize disparate art or equipment stuff to work together. Because if it looks a bit too different and clashy, then it can sort of be more comedic or friendly looking. But if you're making somebody who's supposed to be serious or intimidating or scary, you should bend the rules a bit and make things tie together a little bit more. But I think when you got just a young man just going out and being adventurous, he's just gonna wear what's there. I didn't want to overdo the scar, but I wanted to make it something like noticeable. So I made that sort of slash up from his chin, sort of up through his cheek. One of my students made a good point in a big critique we were having that there was a character we were looking at that had a scar across the bridge of her nose from sort of like the middle of one cheek to the middle of the other over the bridge of the nose. But it was just like a pink line. It was sort of like kind of wider in the middle, like a big sideways diamond shape. But he made the great point that like that scar is not really a battle scar, because in order for it to go from one cheek to the other in one continuous line, it would have had to blast through the nose. But it's just one sort of smooth line over the skin there, sort of like what's his name? The main character from Final Fantasy VIII. Strife? No. Oh wait, Lockhart? I can't remember. Anyway, the main character from Final Fantasy VIII has this one sort of a similar scar. But you really gotta, like, when you put scars on anything, you gotta be like, you're almost like, you gotta play the part of whatever swung that blade or dropped that mace. You gotta like see what happened and then put that mark there. And if it was a big continuous line across his face, it can sort of mean two things. Both imply different stuff. So one would be if the blade actually did cut right through the meat the whole way through and up. And at that point, you're going to be damaging bone, and you're going to need to show that marring affecting the structure of the face. And it would need to be like a really deep, nasty, gnarled scar to make that sell. Or it was something done slowly and sadistically where it did have time to just trace through the skin. And both of those have implications and reasons, and you gotta really think about your scar. You gotta, like, you're the one holding whatever weapon put it there, and you gotta see how it went. You gotta always know why everything is there. Sort of overworking the hand here a little bit. Similar to how I was talking with the hair, as far as the facial hair goes. I play around with it a little bit. I keep it in. I end up keeping it in, but like shaving every day, having like a clean face is really not an old idea. Like even into like the 20th century, people or men usually would like shave once every 5 to 7 days, and 5 o'clock shadow was pretty normal. It wasn't until after World War One, when all the men came back with clean shaven faces, that they had to shave every day for the gas masks to fit, that it became sort of standard fare. And I'd imagine that in a medieval fantasy setting, things probably wouldn't be much different. So he's got sort of like a young, patchy beard growing in, still thin. I remember like my beard when I was that age, and it was more like down or fluff, just kind of wafting in. So he doesn't have that much coverage, but it is a bit long and wispy because he doesn't shave it very often. He's not thinking that way. It goes with his outfit. He's not thinking about how he looks. He's thinking about more important things like adventure and how's everybody doing. And even though it is tacky, that's Terril. It's gotta. I'm not trying to make him cool. I'm just trying to find Terril. In a fantasy setting, the only characters that have clean-shaven faces, I mean, as a small example, there's whatever reason you can think of, as long as it's a good enough reason. Like things like if somebody was part of like a monastic order that hated hair, or preferred youthfulness as a symbol of something, I'd make it something that they would do as part of like their morning ablutions or something. That would be one thing. Or royalty would be good. Somebody who there would be somebody whose job it was to come in and shave them. Somebody who they could afford to pay to keep that sort of equipment. I don't think Terril would have much room for a shaving kit anywhere when he's got big bags of gold to carry around. Or even if there was somebody like a character, or somebody like an adventurer, but they were like vain or thought themselves, or like narcissistic at the very least. Maybe not such a harsh thing as vain, but then having them be clean shaven, but making it look like clean shaven in the way that they had done themselves, with maybe not a razor but a sharp knife, or without a mirror. Maybe they were just using like feel or the reflection of a pond, but they'd be clean shaven, but it wouldn't be pretty clean shaven. It wouldn't be like what a king or a prince would have. It would be, there'd be like the little bits of toilet paper with the dot of blood holding it on, that kind of thing. So even how ugly somebody's facial hair is can have an origin in their character and their personality. I didn't want to have any glowing, magically looking elements on this axe. I thought that the colors were already sort of starting to get overboard, and I didn't want to distract from too much. I think that having a big enough silhouette, the axe already drew enough attention, and I always kind of admired like Peter Jackson's approach to magic in The Lord of the Rings. Like where it was sort of underplayed. It wasn't like purple lightning bolts flying around or anything, or like magic runes floating and glowing everywhere. It was just force-based, sort of implied magic that was around. And I figured, like why would this thing be glowing all the time anyway? I just thought that like as long as I like flashed it up in some other way, like with like fancy embellishment, something that shows that it was made with care and intention, maybe something that's a little bit more ceremonial or has just some sort of significance to it. I thought that'd be a good way to compensate for not having any sort of glowies. Because it might not look magical, but if I picked that axe up and I was an adventurer, I would say, I bet this is probably magical. Work on the armor again. At this point I pretty much settled on it. I didn't want to push it too much. I didn't want to make it just look like alligator belly. So I just sort of vagued it up a little bit. Sort of some older scales fusing together a little bit in the front. is the bronze shield. The bronze shield is fun to do. I do regret not like going back in with a lot of tarnish. Terril did find his shield in a swamp under a dragon, but I figured, by now he would have polished it up and made it really nice. He's probably pretty proud of it. He doesn't want it to just fall apart and get brittle, so he would take care of it. But I really do love the look of tarnished metal, especially in a fantasy setting. It was also because it's so foreshortened. I thought that the tarnish would also clutter up the what's it called, the apple tree device. Yeah, it's called the device. That big the chunk of metal on the front of a shield. I thought the device was already depicted with such like brittle lines and stuff that I just didn't want to have to cloud it up, and I was already running pretty long on this one. I like to try to keep things around 8 hours at most, but getting something done for somebody is just more important than how I feel about how much time. So it's got to get done, and the person's got to be happy with it. So whatever. I'm really trying to be conscious of making sure that, that everything looks like it was made by a different race, unless specifically specified that it was made by the same race. He is all pieced together, which is good. So just sort of like something inspired by a lot of like world tree kind of pictures. Just a motif, just a stylized tree, with the apples going up in sort of like arcs through the tree and all that, and with roots at the bottom, something big across the whole thing. Even the studs around the edge are sort of based on apples as well. It's just nice that it helps make them look a bit more manufactured with all like rivets and stuff. It's kind of hard to draw shields without a bunch of rivets. It it's just not the same. So it's a massive axe. Pretty long. Essentially one big piece of cast iron or mithril or whatever it could be. Whatever, it's important. But all on one big piece, all metal. He's got a little pouch on his belt. I always like to try to include at least a pouch. Like, I don't want to draw a backpack on everybody, or like a big chest that's strapped to their back or something. They do need to have some means of carrying stuff. All these adventurers do walk around with like adventurers kits and all that stuff, but is this kind of superfluous adding that? I mean, sometimes it's the right thing to do. Sometimes you should include it, but I like to just have like an indication. Sometimes if there's room for stuff on the back, I'll throw it in. So this was a dwarven longsword that was given to Terril. It's not as long as, say, a human longsword. I did change sort of the shape of it. So it's not as long as I was originally planning. I was just going to go straight full on like huge long sword, but then I figured with a dwarf, it's kind of like Sting from Tolkien's books, where it's like a sword for a hobbit, but it's just a long knife for an elf. I was thinking that sort of thing too with this dwarven sword, where it is a dwarven longsword, but it's short. It's just sort of more like normal sword length for a human, but also the handle is really thick because of it. Like I like having dwarves with really big hands, so there is some indication of like the dwarven origin of the shape of the sword. So just a hefty belt that holds the sword and the axe. My thought is that the axe is also attached to this same big belt. That's why it's so big. I've also got the armor on top of the belt now, when before the belt was on top of the armor. And I figured that the sword, because it was a gift to him, and it's a kingly gift, make no doubts about it. But I thought that would be much more significant to Terril, and like the armor would he'd be much more okay with the armor coming off before the sword coming off, and so that's why the armor is now on top of the belt. He'd much rather go without the armor than the sword. Let's figure out the blade, then drawing the sheath on top of it, making sure that its edges extend outside the blade, basically just literally constructing it. Growing up, of course, being blown away by Lord of the Rings and everything, they really did call it when they started doing all the geometric patterns and faceted surfaces and stuff. But I'm just bothered that that's taken so much precedence, and so whenever I try to design dwarven stuff these days, I try to find ways to include curves. I'd imagine that master metalworkers, and particularly master stoneworkers, would be far more amazed at curvilinear or like rounded spherical lyrical shapes than polygonal shapes of many angles. I'd imagine that a flat surface would be like, well, can you also tie your shoes? Like, it would sort of be like entry-level masonry work, like really. And I think that like them to carve like a perfect sphere would be like an awesome test for a dwarven skill. So I've been trying to incorporate rounded stuff as much as I can with dwarven things, but yeah, you still do gotta have some of that angular stuff because of how people read it and what it communicates. I remember growing up before Lord of the Rings came out, whenever you saw fantasy dwarves, it was usually either just like European folklore dwarves, or like basically just squat Scottish Vikings with like big orange mohawks, stuff like that. Lord of the Rings really, like Jackson really did come in and owned the tone, like this new design. Like, it was brilliant, but I think we need to start trying to break free from it, and it's fun. It's challenging. I'm gonna do a big thing about dwarves one day, about trying to free the dwarf from the boxy prison that they're in. I've got some ideas for it. Going back to the armor, I wanted to put those scoots back in. Just taking different parts of the leather, of the reptile leather, and using it for different parts. So little details here and there, inspired by alligator belly, of course. Just minor touch-ups. Yeah, Terril was it was really fun to do. Big challenge, definitely. Good character. I'm curious to see what Terril will look like in 40 years, when now it's his time to go around to different bars and tell stories. I really appreciate Taylor's participation and everybody's participation in the weekly free character art lottery. Just follow me on Twitter at R&D Fantasy, and pay attention on every Monday, and I'll let you know what hashtag to tweet to enter the free lottery. I draw your D&D characters for free. What else to say about that? Excuse me. Yeah, it's going really good. I've really been enjoying this stuff. Everybody's response has been really encouraging and great, and I think it's just really fun to do. So yeah, every Monday, midnight to midnight Mountain Time. If you don't know what Mountain Time is, it's a time zone. I'm in Alberta, Canada. Just Google Mountain Time on a Monday, and if it's between midnight and midnight, you can just tweet the hashtag at me to enter, and that's all you got to do to get in. So I look forward to hearing from you. Thanks for watching. Let me know what you think. Still working out some technical stuff, but we're getting better at it. So let me know if there's any way I can improve the videos, and if this format stuff works for you. Thanks again to Taylor. Thanks again to everybody else. And looking forward to drawing many more people's characters. So thanks again. Hope it helped.